All right, let's get going. So there's my qualifications: attorney, accountant, real estate investor, in my case mainly low-income houses and mobile home parks. And no, I'm not a socialist, so sorry, I know that around here that's a popular thing. Okay, let's talk about audits. I'm going to hit the roughly, there's a list that we sent of what I'm going to cover today. I'm going to cover everything but the IRAs again this morning, so I'm just going to take in the order it comes up. What are we seeing in audits? Guys, socialism is expensive. The government is not just broke, it is the brokest government in the history of our race. We are not able to borrow more money because the money to borrow doesn't exist. That's how much we spend more than exists. That's why we print. There are implications. Now, I am a firm believer in taking advantage of human stupidity, and it is around in such abundance we'll have many opportunities. So to start with, negative interest rates. Why is that relevant to IRS audits? We're going to hit negative interest rates. We all agree? They're already in Switzerland, the Nordic countries, and Japan. The government is under a lot of pressure to collect. They're not making money, they're spending more than they can bring in. The IRS is under immense pressure to collect. The economy is probably headed for a downturn. We haven't hit officially hit a recession. A lot can argue that we haven't left one either. They're going to be strapped for revenue. They're getting aggressive, and we're seeing it in a lot of things the IRS does. Audits are not increasing. Why? Congress cut their budget. Why did they do that? I know, because they're evil Republicans and they're heartless and they hate you, right? They want to put you in ovens. Well, no, that's not really my interpretation. The Lois Lerner issue with audits of conservative organizations, the IRS pretty much told Congress to get lost. Congress said, we control the purse strings, and if you don't respond to us in a truthful and complete manner, we're going to cut your budget. The IRS said you wouldn't dare. They dared. So the IRS has had its budget cut. Morale is very low. Talking to various auditors, lawyers, appeals agents, they're embarrassed by the Lerner thing. They know it's not right, and they're ashamed. They have enough decency to feel shame. The morale is also low because of the budget cuts. When people retire in government, they don't necessarily get replaced. This is where inefficiency helps us. When the IRS has its budget cut, people attrition out. Do they necessarily replace them even if they're important? No. There is one class of person at the IRS that makes about 1,000 times, and that number is a correct number, about 1,000 times what they're paid. Auditors. Everybody else supports the auditors. In a rational business, when you have to make cuts, who do you cut? The auditors or the support? In government, which one do you cut? Auditors. So the actual percentage of audits is down, and they're compensating for it. There are two things they're doing to compensate. They're digging up laws that were never intended to be used in the manner that they are now being used and becoming more aggressive. I'm going to give you some examples of that. They are also doing more correspondence audits. We are seeing a fair amount of, you get a paper in the mail, and it says, send us all your receipts for February 2009. And then they're going to prorate based on, let's say you were missing 20% of your deductions for February of 2009. We're going to assume that all of 2009 is 20% low and attributed. So they're taking some shortcuts, first of all. Audits have normally been something that start with a limited scope. That is increasing. So one of the goals, if you get audited, is to keep the limited areas that they're auditing from metastasizing. In other words, if you can nail them good and hard and show and perform on whatever area they're auditing, the odds of the audit spreading are very low. They'll commit their resources everywhere, which is somewhat rational and therefore surprising. I'll give you a good example. My cheapest audit ever occurred this year. Cheapest meaning, what did I bill for the audit? I billed $1,300 for a complete audit. Surprised me greatly. Now, it was an engineer I was dealing with. All right, caveat for the engineers and software people in the room, given the demographics here, that's probably a high number. I love you and I hate you. I love that you're process-oriented and detail-oriented. I hate that you take details and don't apply the concept of materiality to them oftentimes. An engineer is a person who will take my $3.50 an hour rate and argue over a $20 balance sheet item for that hour and then be upset when I actually bill them for it. And they'll say, well, it's not worth it. And I'll say, I know. I don't know why you wanted to argue about the $20, but you took my time. Well, I think it should be free. Well, I think Selma Hayek should have showed up in my room yesterday, but she didn't. So My client was an engineer. He does follow process as well. I spent about an hour showing him how to compile his records. In this case, they wanted the receipts. It was one of those types of audits. They picked 3 items. On his Schedule C, he had a side business assigning properties. So he finds a deal, signs up a contract, sells the contract. He's functionally an unlicensed realtor. Very common technique, especially in areas where people want to make active income versus passive income. They looked at 3 areas. He documented them to the nth degree. He had almost all the receipts. He had a gorgeous spreadsheet and even showed which receipts he was missing, which in his case was less than 1%. So I go into the audit. I'd spent about an hour and a half with him, about a half hour explaining what he needed to do, about an hour reviewing what he did do, went into the audit. Now I profile. I know it's heresy out here. I profile agents hardcore, and I'm usually right. It's statistics. I will look at age, I will look at demographic group, I will look at gender, I will look at ethnicity, and determine what is the likelihood of an agent taking a certain position. And by the way, I'm far more often right than not. So it does work. Like it or not, it does work. This agent was a cat lady. How did I know that? I walked into her cube at the IRS and there were cat posters. And there were also, she likes hockey. Columbus has a really good hockey team. And there were pictures of her hugging all the hockey players one at a time. And they obviously knew she was an IRS agent because their expression was usually, why is this relevant? She took 15 minutes to go through this very well-constructed report that the engineer put together showing that he had receipts for everything. What was her assumption? He had it for these 3 categories. He probably has it for the others. She did one of these. Kind of looked at it. She found amusing that he highlighted in red where he didn't have receipts and said, I'm sure this audit will be fine. What's that? Her way of saying there isn't going to be a change. And then we proceeded to flirt for about an hour and 45 minutes. Now, first of all, she's not the type of person I would normally go for in terms of flirting. Wasn't even hot by IRS standards, and trust me, that is not a high standard. So just not my type. I was about an hour and 45 minutes discussing cats and hockey and all the various permutations of how you could combine those 2 things. I billed the client for the time flirting. Why? It took my time. Why did I choose to stay? What happens when you walk out early on somebody who gave you what you wanted? Somebody who clearly was lonely, who clearly wanted to chat, who clearly wanted a little bit of flirting, who wanted some attention. That's the human element, because most IRS agents are in fact human. They try to screen it out, it's just hard. So that's why it was such a short audit, and we did get a letter within 2 or 3 days that said the audit's over, you owe nothing. So there's the upside. A lot of these audits are shorter and more restricted in terms of scope. If you have your feces in order and you keep good records, I can't emphasize that enough. Entrepreneurs are often good at doing and often retribly horrid at recording what they did, the admin part. And we're going to talk about that some. You need to have a good set of an income statement and a balance sheet by property, not just by company, but by property. You need to be able to trace that to the transactions that gave rise to the income statement and balance sheet. If you have software that downloads receipts and such, converts it to PDF, whatever, that's great. I use my children. That didn't sound right. I employ my children. We pay the kids to scan receipts. What I do is when I travel, first of all, everything is paid with credit card, debit card, or check. In business, the only thing I pay cash for are tips at the hotel. You leave the typically lady who cleans the room $1 or $2. That's the only thing I do in cash. Everything else is done credit card, debit card, etc. Why? There are a number of reasons. A, you don't want to attract suspicion. Now, rightly or wrongly, and I'll argue wrongly, the government is very suspicious if you deal in cash. It means you're a drug dealer or a terrorist. Now, that's not true. That's not what they really think. That's their excuse. They want control. They're banning cash. They got rid of, I think, wasn't it recently, didn't the EU say no more 500 euro notes? Do you think that's really about terrorism? No, it's about controlling you. Cash they can't track. So they're very suspicious of it. Unfortunately, in the context of business and audits, give them what they want to see. And we're going to talk about that a number of times. If it's possible, let them see what they want to see, because they're less likely to dig if it looks right on the surface. So the problem with spending cash in a business is the inability to document it. I pay Jose, the contractor, $600. I have him sign a receipt, let's say. The IRS audits, and what do they say? You could have made this receipt up. Let's talk to Jose. In other words, let's substantiate the receipt. Now, when you go to Jose, the contractor, and you say, Jose, wait a minute, we're going to go talk to the IRS. I mean, that's right up there with we're going to go talk to ICE, right? Yeah, let's have an immigration discussion. No, that doesn't go well, and it attracts attention. So please, in your business, debit card, credit card, or check. And I understand what I'm saying, guys. I do business. Good contractors are hard to come by. Good contractors are hard to come by, and they all have a shelf life, an expiration date. It's like a magazine of bullets. Now, for those of you in California, bullets go through guns. Guns are things we use to shoot people. It's a tool. Some people need killing. If you go to other states, you might see what these look like. But in any event, a contractor is like a magazine, and you don't know how many rounds are in it. You just know one day you're going to pull the trigger and hear that click. They all have an expiration date. Why do I say that? I know what I'm telling you. It's so important to have good contractors, and what happens when you don't pay them cash? Some of them leave. You have a business decision to make. Where's the risk the highest?